Welcome to Inside Marketing with MarketSurge, your front row seat to the boldest ideas and smartest strategies in the marketing game. Your host is Reed Hansen, Chief Growth Officer at MarketSurge.
Hello and welcome back to Inside Marketing with MarketSurge. Today's guest is someone who has been in the Google Ads trenches long enough to see what works, what used to work, and what's completely broken. Jeff Coleman is the founder of Factor 4 Marketing and has been building results-driven Google Ads campaigns since 2004. That's back when paid search was simple, cheap, and didn't come with a 40-page dashboard. Today, Jeff and his team manage over $4 million in annual ad spend, helping everyone from local service businesses to Fortune 500 companies to stop trusting the process and start trusting actual results. Jeff is known for cutting through jargon, calling out agency myths, and showing business owners how to turn Google Ads from a money pit into a predictable lead engine. He's also taught digital marketing at UC San Diego Extension and USD. If you have any questions for Jeff, he's going to be a great resource for you in the future. If you've ever wondered why Google Ads should be working but aren't, this episode is for you. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Reed.
Yeah, my pleasure. You have a very impressive background, and especially in a niche that I think a lot of businesses use, using Google Ads, but not necessarily use it very well. Now, you've said that Google Ads campaigns often underperform even the ones that are administered by the agencies. So in general, what do you see are some of the real reasons, maybe some of the most common reasons that these campaigns are failing?
Well, the biggest one I see is that people don't focus on the right conversions. The algorithms are very goal-driven, and that's one of the things that's changed over time. The algorithms play a huge role now, and if you don't have the right goals, then you start to get a lot of traffic that isn't really something you want to pay for. For example, when we took over a credit union's account, one of the goals that they were measuring against was driving directions to the credit union. Now, yes, you want your people to be, your members to be able to find how to get there, but you don't really want to pay $20 per person who's getting driving directions to your credit union. You want to pay for people who are signing up for new loans, who are opening new accounts. So it's really about finding the right conversions and making sure you're focused on that. And because the algorithms will keep sending more and more of the people who convert, and those are some of your cheapest, the driving directions ones, and that's aren't really who you want to be spending money on, spend your marketing. So that's a really big one that we see. Of course, there are lots of others, we get more nuance, but that one's a obvious and common one that we see.
Interesting. So fair to say that the algorithms have become more complex over time, but really they're very results driven.
Absolutely. And one of the evolutions we've seen in search over time was, it started with the keywords. When, I started doing this 20 years ago, you were building out these keyword lists that were hundreds of keywords long. And what Google started to recognize was it's really hard to, that's what a good campaign manager was doing, but they wanted other advertisers to be able to find success with Google Ads and have their ads shown for more. So they started focusing on search intent. So trying to understand what the searcher is getting at, not necessarily the exact words that they have. And one of the interesting things is over the last 10 years, every single month, 15% of all searches are completely new. Like no one's ever done that search before. I think, the switch to more voice searching and different modes of how people are looking has really changed that, why people have such different search terms. But Google wants to make sure their ads are showing for as many of those as they possibly can. So the search intent became very important for them.
Okay. Now, in your writing, you refer to the statement, trust the process. That's something that agencies say a lot. Do you think that mindset is dangerous for business owners? And what do you think they should be trusting instead?
So, fundamentally, Google Ads does not fit into most advertising agencies well. The Google Ads management, because, and I worked for a digital agency for a while, and that's where I got a lot of this experience, was they're looking for the new shiny objects. And that's often why companies even hire digital agencies. They want to do what's new, they want to do what's cool. Google Ads is typically the opposite of that. It's what works. Discernment is much more important than creativity as you're building campaigns. They will talk about the process and they try and fit search into everything they're doing, which makes sense. But what at the end of the day, you want to see an ROI. Search should be about the prospects who are the closest to converting for you. The very bottom of the funnel is what most of search is about. You don't want to just keep trusting that everything's going to eventually work, and that you should see ROI within a month or two of launching a campaign that makes sense to continue with. And we tell our clients 90 days because some new campaigns can take a little longer and you run into some extra challenges. But if you can't, certainly not within 90 days, but even less than that, you should see a return on investment that makes sense to continue investing. And that's what we talk about, really trusting the results, not the process.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about lead engines, something that you also mention quite a bit. What does that actually mean in practice, and how is that different from just, the old-fashioned approach of, running in some ads and hoping for some conversions?
So, sometimes we give new names to things so that people pay a little more attention to them. And I think that's what we've really tried to do with the lead engine. As I mentioned earlier, it all starts with focusing on the right conversion, making sure that you've really defined what is going to move the needle for you as a business, and that your resources are going into that effort. The next is knowing your numbers. What's the value of a lead or conversion to you? And so we know what success looks like when we've defined it that way. And we're only going to continue running campaigns that are successful in the sense that your cost per lead meets your goal. But what I think we do differently, and this is an important part of the lead engine, is we really try and help our clients focus on what makes them different. And, you know, far too often you hear, if you're talking with a small to mid-sized business, it's our customer service, it's how we treat our customers. And that's just table stakes to even be in business these days. So we really try and help them find what makes them stand out in the digital marketplace, which might be different than what does if they're just talking about their local business, but helping them figure that out so that we can make them stand out on the page, so that the people who are most likely to convert are the ones actually clicking on their ads, because it's expensive when all the ads look the same and the searcher clicks on 4 ads and then decides who to talk to. You really want to filter that out. So you're much more likely to get a lead. You get higher conversion rates because the right people are clicking through on the ads, and that turns them into, prospects and hopefully clients much faster. And then we also work with them to make sure there's some kind of follow-up system in place, so that you're not missing that opportunity and finding the right way for that business to stay in front of folks.
Okay. So I want to go back to something, you've worked in Google Ads a long time, and which is, I'm sure you have a lot of lessons you've gained over those years. I'd say a common sentiment I hear is that people that have done ads for a few years, they're saying, oh, they seem like they're less effective or more expensive now, or I don't like the results I'm getting from Google Ads now. With all those changes you've seen over the years, what do you think is, do you think that's accurate, that they're less effective over time, or what's your opinion on that? Do you think there's still plenty of opportunity?
I think there's plenty of opportunity. The important thing is to know your numbers. Can you deliver the leads for the cost that makes sense for you? But there are also strategies that can make a big difference in outcomes. So one of our larger clients, it's a home services company. They have, I think right now, 38 locations on the East Coast. And, when we took over their campaign a little over a year ago, the former agency that was managing it was doing everything at a very high level. So their specific service line was being advertised with, they just threw all the zip codes in that they serve in one location or one ad group. And, that just looked very circumspect to me. I think they were, that was the right way to do it. And what we've done is broken down both by location and service line each of the things they do. And what we found is the cost per lead in Richmond, Virginia is very different than Bow, New Hampshire. And that changes how you allocate your dollars. But they still sometimes need leads in a particular location. Orlando is where we're focused right now. And, even when they start to creep up a little, they said, no, that's okay. We want, this is where we really need business right now. And so by breaking it down like that, you can start to really see where your advantages are, where your disadvantages are. Some of it's the local competition. And so, we've eked out a cost per lead that is a fraction of what they were paying before because we have a lot more levers to pull. And, we brought down their branded terms they're down to about 18% of what they were before, which meant that they also had a lot more money to put into their non-branded terms. And for their main service line, we've brought that down about half of what it was before. And so they can continue to invest, and it's now a growth engine for them versus it was just trying to keep up the spend on Google Ads before we started working with them.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, very impressive. And now when we talk about data and metrics and numbers, there's a lot of vanity metrics out there and, things that maybe are featured prominent on the Google dashboard or, maybe for rookies, they assume that this is more important. What are some of those vanity metrics that a business owner or brand should avoid?
So a lot of people want to see how many impressions, which, if someone didn't click on your ad, it's hard to even justify why you would care that someone saw your ad. So that's one that I find a lot of business owners in particular focus on. Now, if you're running video ads or something, that's a little different. But if you're talking search ads, you definitely don't want to be focused on the impressions. Click-through rates can matter, but they're also, at the end of the day, it's how much did it cost to get that lead that really matters. So, click-through rates, yes, they're important, but they're not the end all. Raising your click-through rate by 10% isn't necessarily going to make your campaign successful. But the other thing that I see a lot of agencies and businesses that are doing it on their own confuse is they mix up their branded and unbranded terms. Branded are people who are coming back because they already know you or they heard about you and are, looking for you specifically by name. Where unbranded are people who haven't heard of you or may not know of you well. And obviously those are two very different pools of potential customers. And so we always keep those separate for clients so they understand how many of the folks, and it should be super low cost to have your branded terms convert versus your unbranded terms, which can cost, 10 times as much. But those are actual new customers and their growth opportunities. So I really find separating those two and not having a dashboard that just shows your cost per lead across your whole campaign is so important to really understanding the success.
Yeah, no, that's good. I love this kind of line of thinking because, you're really experienced in this area. Are there any other Google Ads best practices, quote unquote, or, traditional thoughts that you think are just, either outdated or never were effective at all?
Well, so I still see a lot of companies using phrase and exact match as their primary way of driving traffic. And as I mentioned earlier, because search intent has become so important to the whole of traffic, that unless you are a national or international brand really focused on a tight niche of a product or service, local businesses, even regional businesses, often benefit from broad match, particularly if you're in a consumer segment. B2B, phrase match and exact match can be a better choice, but you're just missing out on a lot of lower cost clicks and leads if you don't have those broad match in in most instances. So that's one I've definitely found is outdated, and a lot of agencies are still trying to do that as best practice, and it's just not a good fit. The other is, it used to be best practices to really have one keyword to one ad, particularly for anything that was a national or larger campaign. That just loses that search intent aspect that Google's focused on. So having at least a small grouping of keywords in any ad group is generally best practices.
Okay. If a new client came to you and said, I haven't been running Google Ads. I'm not sure if I should, but I'm open to it. But I'd love you to advise me one way or the other. First, would you ever say there are companies that maybe aren't a good fit for Google Ads?
Oh,
And then,
absolutely.
yeah.
And even when we bring on a new client, we always tell them this is a test.
Okay.
If they haven't been running Google Ads. If they have, we obviously can make a better assessment. But we were working with one who did assessments for children for IEP type stuff. And, we tested it for him. And I told him early on that it may not work. And, he just couldn't bring in enough of the right kind of clients to make it work. He gave it 6 months and, he got clients out of it. But at the end of the day, we couldn't make the cost per lead work for the conversion rate he was getting. I think he might have been able to do more on the conversion rate, but it wasn't, he just didn't have the capacity to do the changes on the back end that might have helped. But yeah, and some, the cost per click can be awfully high in certain categories.
Yeah.
So if you don't have your sales process dialed in as a business, it's going to be a lot harder even when those leads come in to convert a high enough portion of them.
Okay.
And then there are also, if you don't have a product or service that people are actually looking for directly enough, search is never going to be a good match for that.
Okay, so conversely, what situation would a business be in that your ears would really perk up and say I think we've got a lot of low-hanging fruit for you? Is it about the industry size of the business or in a particularly exciting offering? What gets you excited?
Yeah, so businesses that are doing something different than their competitors is really exciting.
Yeah.
We have one client who does CPR training, and he's located in the Philadelphia area. And when you read their reviews, people talk about how they feel so ready to save a life versus a checkbox. We're required by regulation to have CPR training every 2 years for all of our employees or all our frontline. And that's a really exciting client to work with because they are doing something different than the industry standard. It's better. And they, once you bring them in as a client and help them get the leads, they have huge growth potential. And I was super excited when this company closed their largest client ever that they generated them the lead through Google Ads. They obviously closed them, but they're training thousands of people at a particular organization over the course of 3 years, and that's just is a whole new market for them. And so those kind of clients are a lot of fun to work with, and it gives us a lot of potential. We worked with them on the landing pages to make sure their differentiators stood out. And the ads practically write themselves if you do a good job of explaining why you want to work with them on the landing page.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I think you've mentioned that uncovering differentiators is really important before you start running the ads. And I mean, it's a sound business principle, and I think it would apply to a lot of businesses. Is really find what do you do different and special and better, and I think that makes a ton of sense, and it seems to align with everything you're saying. So, Jeff, you've got a lot of experience. I think you'd be a great person for a business looking to get into Google Ads. Where can people find you or learn more from you?
Sure. If you go to our company website, factor4.com, factorfour.com, you can learn more about us. You can see why we think we're different than most agencies that you would work with. And, if anyone has questions, I'm always happy to talk Google Ads and even marketing a little more broadly with business owners and marketing people because it's just fun. It's what I love doing. It's what I've been doing for a very long time at this point.
Well, thanks so much for sharing so much helpful information. And I definitely point anybody to Jeff that is looking to get deeper into Google Ads. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Reed, thanks for having me. It's been great.
Want to stay ahead of what's actually working in marketing right now? Head over to MarketSurge.io and see how we're helping businesses grow smarter, faster, and louder. That's MarketSurge.io, because your next breakthrough shouldn't be a guess.